The best teachers are those who show you where to look, but don't tell you what to see. Alexandra K. Tremfer. Acknowledgements. Firstly, I would like to thank God for being so merciful and gracious for enabling this initiative, which started out as just a seed of an idea a short while back. As the famous astronomer Carl Sagan stated, you have to know the past to understand the present. This reminds me to be thankful for the past and the people who have made a positive contribution in shaping my present, thus enabling me to achieve this feat. One of the key people in this was none other than my beloved mother and now my guardian angel, without whom this voluminous task would not have been remotely possible. Likewise, my father has been and still is a driving force for myself and the family. He has always nurtured and protected us and has been selfless in encouraging all of us to pursue our passions. Similarly, without the guidance of my wife, I may still have been roaming the streets of West London, unhinged and with no bearings of a sound future. My wife brought into this world 3 amazing children for me, for which I am immensely grateful. When I look at my children, I almost feel like they have been present throughout my entire life as they bring a profound feeling of belonging and purpose to my life. Maybe, this is the power of human love and the interplay of the human spirit. This project could not have been possible without mentioning a few indispensable people. Yaz, Ria, Kaz, Asad, Ofsar, Amir, Alikan, Nick and Jose, whose contribution towards this book have been too vast to contain within mere sentences. Additionally, I am forever thankful to countless other people who have taken time out of their busy lives to confer with me and provide me with priceless feedback. I may have forgotten to mention many people, but I would like to let them know I am forever, indeed indebted to them as well. The current global crisis has no doubt shaken the world to its core and claimed so many precious lives, including that of my dearest Uncle Hussein, to whom I dedicate this endeavor. If this is anything to go by, I am sure we as a human race have learnt one thing, that we are an extremely optimistic species. Throughout the history of man, one thing is consistent, that no matter how bleak the outcome may seem, we still give life our very best shot. Ultimately, success is not a straight line, but it is guaranteed if for every time you fall, you stand up and stay resilient. Thus, let the journey in be a guiding beacon of hope along your journey towards self-realization. Wishing you love and light. The circle of life reflects diversity converging into the one and only universal truth. Rahim Rashid, 2024. The Journey In. Preface. Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "War is when your government tells you who the enemy is. Revolution is when you figure it out for yourself." The journey in is about creating your own inner revolution. Furthermore, this short book has been written to provide you with some insight, in the hope it will motivate you to think outside the box. So, how does one go about thinking outside the box? And is it really necessary to think outside the box? Let me start by giving you this statistic: 1% control the world, 4% are their puppets, 90% are asleep and the remaining 5% know and try to wake the 90%. The 1% use the 4% to prevent the 5% from waking up the 90%, anon. I will let this sink in and have you decide whether you feel it is worth breaking the shackles of an imprisoned existence. As an associate professor at various universities, it is incumbent upon me to refrain from providing answers to every question posed by students, albeit no one possesses answers to all inquiries. By consistently offering every solution, students would inevitably lose the motivation to seek knowledge autonomously. Learning embodies a journey of self-discovery, encapsulated succinctly by the quotation at the outset of the book: "The best teachers are those who show you where to look, but don't tell you what to see." Thus, it is the responsibility of educators to furnish students with the requisite tools and foundational knowledge. However, it remains the prerogative of the students to proactively utilize these resources and transform them into a personalized understanding, akin to crafting a home of their own design. Should teachers furnish all the answers, the resulting knowledge would lack individual ownership, hindering the immense fulfillment one achieves from the process of self-discovery. Current data clearly indicates a concerning trend, researchers suggest that many graduates are struggling to secure jobs in their respective fields of study. This challenge stems from their inability to innovate or contribute to real-life problem-solving. Renowned entrepreneurs like Richard Branson have identified a fundamental issue: the disconnect between current academic theory and practical application. Additionally, a lack of competence and experience exacerbates the problem. Given these challenges, aspiring individuals must grasp Benjamin Bloom's theory, known as Bloom's taxonomy. This theory provides a roadmap for transitioning from mere rote learning, focused solely on passing exams, to breaking barriers and creating ideas which are valued by organizations' society. Bloom's taxonomy is a framework that helps us understand different levels of learning. The framework starts with the basic acquisition of knowledge. Understanding follows, as there's no value in accumulating knowledge without comprehension. Application comes next. Knowledge is futile if not put into practice. With repeated application, one progresses to the concept of analysis, discerning the pros and cons of various approaches. Through experience, individuals reach the synthesis stage, developing their own methodologies and ideas. Ultimately, the sixth objective involves evaluating what you have created. This stage should now enable you to assess the extent of impact the creation will make on organizations and societies at large. To illustrate this concept, consider the analogy of baking a cake. It begins with understanding the steps required, knowledge, followed by comprehending those steps, understanding. Then, one must execute the process, application, and assess the outcome, analysis. Experimentation with different methods or ingredients to form something creative. Synthesis, potentially resulting in an improved recipe or the realization that the original recipe suffices. Evaluation. By embracing Bloom's taxonomy, individuals can navigate from tacit knowledge to a realm of dynamic creativity. It serves as one of many invaluable frameworks facilitating this transition that society needs. Nonetheless, the knowledge I want to explore in this short book is much more powerful and goes beyond the physical and more towards the internal, existential, the all-encompassing inner knowledge. When one starts from the inside, it is a grounding experience. This reminds me of a hadith, saying, of Hazrat Ali, peace be upon him, within you is enfolded the entire universe. Therefore, with this quote in mind, let us delve into ourselves to explore the universe from the inside, before cultivating it to manifest outwardly, into our physical existence. Introduction. I once encountered a man running a hotel who had been doing the same job for more than 40 years. He looked extremely tired and gaunt. I told him that he should take some time off and enjoy some of the money that he had made. His answer saddened me. He said if he went on holiday, he would not be able to trust any of his staff to run the hotel for him and he would have to pay higher wages to cover for him. He had taken on the opinion that there was no one else who could run the hotel as well as he could. During my stay, I saw lots of things wrong with the service. He had become so worn out that he was making simple mistakes in his duty, even as he continued feeding himself this false perception that no one else could be trusted to do what he was doing. I realized he was an extremely poor man in a rich man's body. He was not running a successful business at all. Actually, he was losing value, health, and money, all without realizing it. I tried to reason with him by showing him that his approach was flawed and self-destructive. Once he understood my rationale, he was willing to seek advice. After several conversations over coffee, you could noticeably see the positive change in his life. This experience motivated me to begin my journey in the hope that I can help a vast number of people to live a more fulfilling and purposeful life. And hopefully this example will aid in contextualizing the message I am trying to convey throughout this book. The journey in is the basis of this book and the burning purpose of the past several years of my life. It has become a passion project as I seek a better way of living, thinking, and looking at our world. A lot of lines have become blurred in the last 2 decades as the entire planet has become overly complicated with information overload, thanks to new technology that allows us to transmit opinions as facts in real time with little to no gatekeeping. It is dangerously easy to be influenced by the outside world instead of using your own thoughts, perceptions, and sense of reality to establish your own belief system. When we let others influence us without taking the time and effort to understand why we make ourselves susceptible to seeing the world through someone else's lens, we are committing to beliefs and ideas that might not align with our own set of values, causing us to make decisions that are not in our best interest. It is not just individuals who are trying to influence us. Corporations, advertising companies, marketing campaigns, religious ideologies, and political parties competing for our attention, so that they can tell us how to think, who to listen to, who to hate, and where to squander our money. It's not just about influence, it's about control, and if you are not in control of your mind, you are not in control of your life. Defining the journey in. What do I mean by the journey in? The journey in is a process. The first concerns controlling your carnal self by quieting your egotistical mind as it battles with you daily in an attempt to keep your limited self alive. Your carnal self is the part of your mind that constantly wants something and is very rarely satisfied. It is the part of your mind that is constantly being bombarded by temptations from things like social media, TV commercials, addictive behaviors, and so forth. It is no coincidence that more and more people are struggling to keep control of their carnal self. The powers that control the internet are particularly impressive at grabbing our attention and shaping our behaviors, making us into the two-legged version of Pavlov's dog. Each time a notification comes across our phone, we grab it out of instinct regardless of what real-life activity we are currently engaged in. This Pavlovian-type reflex has been exacerbated by the more recent discovery of the popcorn brain, where attention spans have become fragmented due to an overfeed of rapid-fire information. We have come to define ourselves based on what is happening online, how many likes our posts got, who commented on our photo, who retweeted our meme. It's all a sham that doesn't exist in the real world, yet we continually want to define ourselves by it. We're scared of missing out digitally, but without realizing it we are missing out on reality. At some point when the fear of losing out, that limited identity tries to knock you into action, stay calm and quiet, feel the fear, and accept the fear without allowing it to take you over. Be a bystander, and be conscious of your thoughts and emotions, very much like was expressed by Eckhart Tolle in his book, The Power of Now. Focus attention on the feeling inside you. Know that it is the pain body. Accept that it is there. Don't think about it, don't let the feeling turn into thinking. Don't judge or analyze. Don't make an identity for yourself out of it. Stay present, and continue to be the observer of what is happening inside of you. Become aware not only of the emotional pain but also of the one who observes, the silent watcher. This is the power of the now, the power of your own conscious presence. Then see what happens. Nothing lasts forever, for everything passes over time. There is a point at which even the fear of loss of that limited identity will pass. The journey in is the result of being able to quieten the egotistical mind. When you are focused and in control, you can access that reservoir of energy that exists deep within you. It is powered by an unlimited source that allows the singular you to be powered by universal energy. Once achieved, it will allow you to actualize the life you always dreamt of living, not just materialistically but also emotionally. I decided to embark on a journey of searching for the truth after bearing witness to the atrocities in the world today. I aim to share my own subjective opinion about what I see around me and what I've learnt from my very own journey in. I hope to transfer to you the importance of deep thinking. Before you act on an intrusive thought, which could be a very destructive form of behaviour, it is imperative to think, to ponder, and to understand, because without realizing it, you could be influenced by something else or someone else. We too often form our opinions based on what we hear from other people, rather than taking our time to discern what our own opinion is based on, observation and consideration. Part of the reason we form some opinions so quickly is because of a concept known as heuristics. Heuristics are defined as mental shortcuts that can facilitate problem-solving and probability judgments. It is a natural way in which we humans form opinions through shortcuts. An easy example is a traffic signal. When the light turns red, it means stop, and when it turns green, it means to go. We all know this, but why is it so? What drove us to think this way? You might say school or teachers or the driving code or cultural norms, and those are all right to a degree. It is safe to assume we form opinions from records we have gathered of the past. Heuristics are generalizations that reduce the mental load. They can be effective for making immediate judgments. However, they can often result in irrational or inaccurate conclusions. We can use the example of another traffic signal to make the opposite point. Say you're out in the middle of nowhere at 6 a.m. on Christmas morning driving your car. You approach a railroad track crossing when suddenly the arm comes down and the lights are flashing like a train is coming. You look left and right, but there is no train. In fact, you don't see another living soul or moving vehicle anywhere. Clearly the signal is malfunctioning and you have no recourse but to follow its instructions. And yet that's what most people will be compelled to do. With nothing in sight and definitely no train on the tracks, people will sit there and stare and wait for the train that isn't there to appear. Only when the arm and the light tell them they can go, only then do they feel it is safe to proceed. I am in no way asking you to practice unsafe behaviour, but encouraging you to take time to ponder beyond the mental shortcuts that have been pre-fed into our system and try and think beyond such tendencies, by using your intellect rather than relying on default-type decision-making. When making decisions, we must take time to think deeper, ponder upon our own bias and try to think as neutrally and objectively as possible before making decisions. When we let outside factors make our choices for us, when we take the quick and easy path to get to the next thing, we are being disloyal to ourselves and our intent to live the best life possible, not just for ourselves, but for our bigger role as part of a collective of humanity. Other than hermeneutics, knowledge of interpretation, or conceptual biases, we should also be mindful of the etymology of words. We are so sure of ourselves when expressing views or trying to disprove other views, we forget that words or meanings of those words may have changed over the last 50 years. When we put this into perspective and context, is it not rather ironic and moronic of man to be so sure of their opinions, or are we still sat there trying to fuel the fire of that egoic mind, fooling ourselves into thinking our opinion somehow supersedes someone else's, just because it does not quite fit our narrative? Think before reacting. The identity you are trying to preserve is the carnal, limited identity, whose sole mission is to keep you fearful of losing it. We should seek to replace that limited identity with the unlimited reservoir. But it is a constant struggle with multiple forces working against us, almost like a disease. The symptoms of this disease may present themselves in many ways, some of which are uncovered when we attempt to prove ourselves right, believe only we can be right, and that no other point of view is valuable. It is a self-serving, selfish, defense mechanism, and eliminating it is the ultimate goal of this journey we will be taking together over the next few pages. The identity you are trying to preserve is the carnal, limited identity, whose sole mission is to keep you fearful of losing it. We should seek to replace that limited identity with the universal identity. We all know that no one can always be right, but our carnal selves deceive us into thinking that we are the only anomaly to that rule. Our carnal selves want us to think that only we can be right, and that no other point of view is valuable. It is a narcissistic mechanism, and together, we will take the journey towards conquering our carnal selves. The journey in is not about me. Instead, it is about us. Which us, you might ask? The only part of us that matters. A collective, constantly resonating energy force. When we work together, our combined efforts allow us the ability to do almost anything. We are nearly limitless in what we can achieve. Just consider some of the great things that have happened in our collective history. All of them were done through a joint effort of people working together to achieve something remarkable, not worried about individual accolades or feeding one's egos. If you need a tangible example, look no further than the recent COVID-19 pandemic, which swept across the entire world in mere days and put everyone in the same circumstances, unsure of the future, clinging on to hope and uniting as best as we can. From all of that turmoil and doubt, rose a collective effort of the world's best scientists, doctors, and pharmaceutical companies to not only develop a cure for the coronavirus but also do it in record-breaking time. Before 2020, the fastest that a cure had been developed and distributed to a mass population had been 6 years back in the 1960s. Removing ego and personal pride from the occasion and focusing strictly on aiding humanity with that collective energy, the international science community achieved the same feat in 11 months. The difference between allowing the carnal mind to dominate your thoughts and the ability to think freely, and in doing so, becoming part of humanity's larger collective force for good, is nothing short of miraculous, life-changing, and the ideal that we should all be striving for. It's time to break those shackles and join me on the journey in Chapter 1, Understanding Fear. That force I defined in the previous chapter is out there for anyone to embody, but as individuals, we struggle to embrace it. That force gives us the best chance to actualize the things we visualize, to make the world a better place, not just for ourselves but for everyone. If we know that is possible, and we see what results can come from it, why do we not do it automatically? What is keeping us from being able to embrace it fully? You have likely sensed it or guessed it, and just need to admit it. There is no way around it other than to fully immerse yourself in it. The emotion that is restraining us from performing at our best and from breaking the chains that limit the way we think and see the world can be summed up in one simple, yet often crippling word. Fear. Yes, fear. That which causes us to have a knee-jerk reaction, to find ourselves experiencing the intensity of a fight-or-flight reaction, and the very sentiment that keeps one on the edge of self-realization, but not quite there. Fear also causes us to lose faith and forces us to find this faith elsewhere other than in the belief of a higher power. When people lose faith, they try to find it in all sorts of unsavory places. Addictions, obsessions, and pursuits that corrupt the body and the soul. God placed the best things in life on the other side of fear. Will Smith. So, what is fear truly? A popular online dictionary defines fear as a feeling induced by perceived danger or threat that occurs in certain types of organisms, which causes a change in metabolic and organ functions and ultimately a change in behaviour, such as fleeing, hiding, or freezing from perceived traumatic events. What is it that we actually fear? Take a minute and list the things that you fear the most. If you are feeling trepidation about this, I'll start by sharing my own list of personal fears and evaluate them thereafter. 1. Being eaten by a snake. 2. Fatal car crash. 3. Plane crash. 4. Losing family, friends. 5. Poverty. 6. Failure. 7. Getting a deadly disease. 8. Being attacked with acid. 9. Being stabbed to death. 10. Fear of God. If we take a moment to analyze my list, we can quickly see a pattern. The majority of events on this list are predominantly out of one's control. The only two we might have some control over are poverty and failure, and even those are pretty subjective terms. So, what does that tell us about fear? That it's almost entirely of our own creation, something we conjure up inside of ourselves, and something that our minds devise. Of course, one acknowledges factors such as deep trauma or other medical conditions caused by deep-rooted events, which is slightly more complex than just mind over matter to keep us from going outside of our so-called comfort zone, which is usually no more than the collective opinions of others that we have allowed to shape our frame of mind to accept an existence where we aren't forced to make many tough decisions, don't have to work too hard or take on experiences that might challenge our pre-existing belief systems. As we travel along this journey in we will begin to see that a lot of things we hold as true and right only have those parameters because someone else has told us what to think. When did we lose control of ourselves? When did we so easily give away control over our thoughts? Let us now together explore some possible answers to these pressing questions I have taken time and deep thought in putting together, within this short book of The Journey In. The idea of being courageous is that even though you're scared, you just do the right thing anyway. Dave Chappell. It becomes a self-regulating reflex guiding you towards the best outcome. Chapter 2, Learning the Truth. As we explore these comments, I want you to keep in mind that everything I say is my subjective opinion. I wonder, is it possible to have anything but subjective opinions? Can anything be considered the absolute truth? Even the word truth alludes to something being absolutely right. But what I perceive as being right, another person could perceive as being wrong. It all depends on so many factors. For example, I believe eating the flesh of slaughtered animals is fine, but then there are a vast number of people who believe it is wrong. I personally believe it to be okay, solely because my family has taught me this opinion, and therefore my viewpoint has been formed from what I have been taught growing up. If my family, like so many people in the world, believed it was wrong to eat meat, then maybe my stance would be totally opposite to what I now believe to be true. What does one's truth have to do with fear? Everything. We fear that our opinion will not matter and feel like it invalidates our significance. We fear losing our identity. We fear that expressing our opinion might make others think less of us. It might make us lose prestige, lose our position in life, lose the respect of our peers or the love of those closest to us. We have delusional visions of ourselves standing by an unpopular opinion and being laughed at, mocked, ridiculed, shunned, and more. In the era of social media, we see ourselves being cancelled for holding and expressing an unpopular opinion. What we fail to understand is that our collective identity, which I call the identity of the spirit, is different from our carnal identity. Our collective identity is eternal, whilst our carnal identity is limited by both time and potential. This limited identity is what we fear losing and what we fight daily to keep alive. What do I mean by limited identity? It is the narrow view we have of ourselves right now, in the moment. We worry about minor things like what clothes we are going to wear when we go to a party, what our co-workers are saying about us when we aren't around, why more people aren't noticing our posts on social media, and other things that have no lasting effect on our lives or anyone else's for that matter. To put it into perspective, we are acting like sheep fighting for tiny amounts of land inside a cage, having forgotten that by opening the cage we can access acres of fields. Defining truth. Just because we believe we are right, does not make someone else wrong. Accepting this, using our carnal identity is going to prove very difficult because at that point we are in defense mode. This means we think that anyone who holds a slightly different belief to ours is wrong. We can equate it to two families deciding to take a trip to Disney World from the same city. Let's pick Houston for this example. One family is going to fly there and the other is going to drive. The flight is barely 2 hours, meaning they could be riding Space Mountain within a few hours of leaving their home, but the plane tickets are very expensive and the trip to the airport is very stressful. The other family decides to drive. It takes them 2 days to drive the entire 1,000 miles, but it is much more affordable and offers them more time together. Which way is better? They each have positives and drawbacks. The destination is the same, so it's impossible to say if one route is better than the other. Some will arrive earlier than others, but this does not matter. I liken it to the wheel illustrated at the start of the book. No matter which spoke or route you are placed on in life, the destination is the same. I believe that truth also has one singular definition. The only truth is the objective. It does not need a hypothesis, validation, or huge sample size to prove its point of view. It is the collective truth, accepted by the collective spirit, whether our carnal self accepts it or not. It has been described as the essence of love, total and complete submission with no carnal desire, the ability to be totally selfless. Scholars, poets, and philosophers have debated truth since the beginning of time. Within this short book, I have decided to use a mixture of philosophies to explore it, namely, psychologically, this philosophy explores behaviour and the mind, peering deeper into why we think the way we do. Sociologically, this perspective explores patterns of behavior and can be used to rationalize my standpoint. Scientifically, this perspective explores the subject of fear scientifically and will allow us to explain how fear releases endorphins and creates the flight or fight response in our bodies. Chapter 3: Defining our relationship with God. With one exception, my top 10 list of fears all relate to earthly things. But number 10 on my list states, I am fearful of God. This brings me to ponder two main questions. Should we fear God or should we love God? Are these two essentially the same thing? The majority of the time, such responses to these questions depend on who you are trying to please. If you want to please your carnal self, then fearing God helps one validate their beliefs. One often believes that by abstaining from doing certain activities out of fear of retribution you get rewarded, whereas as the opposite, by disobeying the command of God, you shall bear his wrath. Ask yourself this question: by carrying out the actions as ordained by God, are we acting selflessly without a sense of getting anything in return, or is there a hint of self-gratification? And still after all this time the sun has never said to the earth, you owe me. Look what happens with love like that, it lights up the sky. Rumi. Can actions be motivated without some sort of reward? The answer is yes. However, it is only possible once you decide to sacrifice that limited, carnal self and realize the collective power. At every point in our lives, we are trying to preserve the carnal self. Your ego needs to be controlled in order to start living a better life. Let's say you have a big performance review coming up at work next week, so you stop along your commute and buy the office breakfast today. Sure, it's nice to be nice, but your real motivation is self-serving. You want your supervisor to have something good to think about when he or she sits down to do your review. Your spouse is mad at you because you made a rude comment without thinking about their feelings. So, you buy them flowers or take them out to dinner or do something around the house that you've been promising. You tell yourself that you're doing it to make them happy, but that's not entirely true. You're also doing it so that you don't have the stress of them being mad at you. Even things we believe we're doing to be altruistic often have a secret motivation. When people volunteer at a food bank or a homeless shelter to help others, they insist on taking a few selfies and posting them to their social media so that they can get all the likes and accolades from their circle of followers telling them how great they are. Even when we think we're being selfless, we find ways to make it about us, and at a detriment to ourselves and others. We all want to go to heaven, but no one is willing to die. B.B. King. However, the death I am talking about here is not the physical, rather it is the carnal self, which limits our true potential. It can be exceptionally difficult to let go, because we've been conditioned to defend our carnal selves for most of our lives. Exactly like when one visits the doctor, sickness is assessed by their evident symptoms. Similarly, one's actions dictate their state of being. If one is still trying hard to preserve their false sense of carnal identity, then they have not yet gotten there. Furthermore, if one's actions are selfish in nature, including so-called selfless actions that are still designed to make someone feel good about themselves, then they are still far away from that goal. Sadhguru, in his video from the College of Defense Management, 2021, reminds us of the minuscule size of our existence relative to the cosmos. If anything, this should be a sound reminder and a strong reason to let go of that limited egotistical identity. If that is not enough, then maybe the following diagram will put things into perspective. Chapter 4: Leaving our carnal identity behind. Once I switched my narrative to being the learner, it didn't matter where I started, it only mattered where I was trying to go. Tom Bilyeu. Bilu goes on to express how humans have the ability to achieve whatever they want as long as they access that potential, which I believe speaks of the requirement to let go of their carnal identity. Why is it so difficult to let go? We have gotten used to being ensnared by the shackles of our body's capabilities. I would liken this restriction to birds that have the ability to fly but have lost the wherewithal to spread their wings and take to the skies. We believe our carnal instinct is all we have to identify with, therefore we try our best to protect that limited singular identity. In doing so, we forget that the collective energy has the capacity to actualize whatever we visualize and power us to reach our true potential. We get so wrapped up in our cycle of feeling good about ourselves via social media, or how big our paychecks are, or how many compliments we can get from other people, or the instant gratification from the consumption of alcohol or drugs. When we continue to believe that the carnal self is the only avenue where we can gain satisfaction and happiness, we cannot see past our own lives to the power of community, the power of the energy force that exists in us all, the ultimate galvanizing force. Whatever it is that we believe to be our perceived reality, does not change the actual reality. That energy force works regardless. Whatever we keep feeding into our mind to believe to be the truth, ultimately becomes our reality. It can be considered a catch-22 situation, because whatever it is we fear and keep thinking about brings about more of the same result. It is at the point of physical death that you wake up to the ultimate realization of reality. Anon. The movie, The Matrix, encapsulates this ideology beautifully. Rebel leader Morpheus gives newcomer Neo the choice of the blue pill, which if taken, would keep Neo in the computer-generated reality that has been given to him, or he had the choice of taking the red pill and experience the truth, which is that he's never actually taken a single step in the real world. Should we care about reality? The answer depends entirely on how passionately you want to find the truth, and thereafter capitalize on that truth to achieve greatness beyond your imagination. Lately, reality is getting a lot more digital, which sometimes feels unbearable. Life is starting to imitate art quite intimately. Neo and Morpheus had the Matrix, a computer simulation run by sentient machines. We now have artificial intelligence, AI, whereby computers make decisions and generate content by both imitating our own brain constructs and using massive sets of data to learn from. Companies and governments all over the world are pouring money into AI research. But not all of them are enthusiastic about what it means. Elon Musk, leader of Tesla and X among others, told The Guardian in 2016, "If the AI that they develop goes awry, we risk having an immortal and super powerful dictator forever." Y Combinator founder Sam Altman seems to share these concerns, but also Musk's sense of optimism toward whatever Matrix-like reality we are facing. He told The New Yorker in 2016, "The merge has begun, and a merge is our best scenario. Any version without a merge will have conflict. We enslave the AI or it enslaves us. The full-on crazy version of the merge is that we get our brains uploaded into the cloud. I'd love that. We need to level up humans, because our descendants will either conquer the galaxy or extinguish consciousness in the universe forever. What a time to be alive!" The biggest problem with mankind in my eyes is that in a bid to preserve our carnal instinct, we fear becoming one collective. We fear losing our physically limited singular identity in place for a much more powerful unified identity. You can see it in every social media post that pops up on your feed all day long. People pose for selfies in front of their dinner plates, their aeroplane gates, and their Starbucks orders to remind you that they are individuals and important. Look at me, their actions seem to say. See this? I am doing it. I am important and unique. It is our default mode to hold on to our individual identity, even when it becomes a detriment to our lives overall. We see this from people online or in the public eye who are determined to keep getting attention by saying and doing things that are typically counterproductive to gaining emotional connections or positive responses with others. They will do anything to get people looking at them. But this is even true for those who aren't looking to make a splash. but rather just hang on to the things that they are comfortable having as their defining characteristics. Chapter 5: Separating Self from Selfless. To act selflessly is a virtue of being human. However, it is incongruous to how society and the economy function. They have been designed in such a way as to create more greed, a way to further the divide between the rich and the poor, and a means to hoard resources. Think for a moment how wrong it seems when a nation of rice farmers cannot afford to eat the very rice that they harvest. From what angle, aside from tyrannical, does that seem right? Society would have you believe it to be the norm, and we have become so acclimatized to such practices that this seems like nothing out of the ordinary to us. It is a vicious cycle that is destroying the planet in order to fulfill our wants. We are led to believe that it is okay to carry on destroying the planet. The framework that has been put in place by society has made it totally normal for us to wage war with other resource-rich countries just so that we can hoard more resources. We have become immune to the atrocities from around the world. The media does not bat an eyelid when kids are being slaughtered in parts of the world. The minute that even 1% of your conscience awakens to the tyranny, the media either distracts you or tries to convince you that the actions being carried out are okay. And we seem to become desensitized to it and think, as long as it does not affect us, it is somehow acceptable. Recent atrocities are a prime example. We fuel these flames, and unless we come together to provide an alternative framework, we will continue to be secondary contributors to all of the atrocities happening around the world. I have found that the very self-righteous, or the ones who seem to believe they are self-righteous, actually still self-serving and not yet at the stage of acceptance. They might just be on the border of letting go of the fear factor, as they have learned to fight against all the other carnal self-serving actions. It's like being at the open door of an aeroplane with the parachute on your back, but not yet jumping out and surrendering to what's next. These people love to do acts of service to the needy, but they always seem to want something back, even having silent debates with God disguised as prayers in which they list their own acts of service. That is holding on to the carnal identity. This means there is still work to be done on ourselves. I was walking down the street one day when I passed people selling books on a stall. Always interested in perusing titles, I stopped, only to have the couple running the stall to inform me that the books were actually free. I quickly realized the books might be free, but these well-meaning people were in fact trying to sell me their ideology, and their perspective of what they believed was right. They were explaining the ideology of Protestant Christianity to me, emphasizing how this was the one path to take in order to reach heaven. As I had some time, I decided to listen to them and hear what they had to say. After I heard what they had to say, I thanked them for taking the time to share their beliefs with me so passionately. A little farther down the street, I noticed another table, although with fewer books this time. I found more people behind the table. I asked them if they were partnered with the people I met prior, but they had an ideology that was completely the opposite. They were Catholics. Again, I listened and heard what they had to say. 4 to 5 minutes passed by before I respectfully excused myself and left. On my train ride home, I tried my very best to analyze both opposing views without my rose-colored glasses on. Although I tried to judge who was right using the only tools and contextual knowledge I had, which included my own religious belief system, value system, and schooling. The difference between the Protestants and the Catholics reminds me of a conversation I had previously with a group of Muslims. In my humble opinion, the Protestant ideology seemed very similar to the Muslim sects known as Sunni banning images and monastic orders, whereas the Catholic view seemed to resonate relatively closer to the Shia Muslims' view of Islam, the belief in the Pope or Ayatollahs. Individual points of view are all valid as far as they are exactly that. The issue here is not about having a point of view, but rather using your points of view to disprove someone else's. Just so long as you are not party to that, then it is fine. There is a man who goes by the title of Aga Khan. He is the person who serves as the imam of a sect of Shias. He subscribes to the idea that the violence in today's world are clashes of ignorance and not of civilization. Through the work of his institution, can't aim to remedy ignorance through the broad study of a variety of world cultures. This tells me that it is not only knowledge which is power, but intellect as well. It is the ability to use our intelligence and realize and accept that there is not one singular right way of looking at and approaching the journey in. Diversity of thought, beliefs and our contextual understanding give us the ability to experience the various facets of the journey in. So the question to ask oneself is, why is the beauty of this diversity not experienced, and more so, why is it not celebrated? Quite simply because we are fearful of losing that limited carnal, singular identity. Hence, we hold on to it and defend our singular views because accepting or celebrating any other views would mean a loss of, or a dilution of both our views and existence. If our carnal self has difficulties with rationally explaining an idea, in order to preserve its limited identity, people generally take a defensive stance. They believe that to accept another's point of view and believe it will somehow, in some way, belittle their own existence. However, what many fail to realize is that the being within cannot be belittled. It is like a battery, storing energy that we can't access until we pause and realize how to switch it on. Chapter 6: Our Collective Corruption of Religion. There came a time in my life when I became a total observer and tried my best to be non-judgmental. I tried to listen to people's points of view instead of constantly prejudging everyone based on what they looked like, what they sounded like, where they were from and my own biases of them. I won't lie, it was incredibly difficult to do so. It goes back to heuristics and the way we are being influenced throughout our lives, often without even knowing it. Just like my parents and family members influenced me to be a meat eater, we are influenced from an early age by the people around us. That's to be expected, but when we continue to let that happen as we become adults, holding others' opinions as more valuable than our own, we are constantly giving away our freedom and our independent thought. I tried to understand the person expressing their perspective, their context, and the possible reasons for interpreting certain events in a certain way. What I started to realize more day by day is that many people who held a religious viewpoint are so strongly convinced of their belief system that many were willing to die believing it to be the ultimate truth. While I sense a lot of passion and faith in these beliefs, I also sense a lack of depth. I feel that many of these people definitely see the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel that they are traveling in, but they refuse to believe that there are any other tunnels that also may lead to the same light. All these debates seem to resonate with that same idea, people being defensive in a bid to preserve their singular, assumed, correct point of view. This is the point where it stops being a rational dialogue and becomes a monologue. At that point, is a person solely speaking to gain validation for the knowledge they have, or are they sharing knowledge for a greater good? The majority of the time, I realized it was mostly to gain validation. Having a strong character based on certain values, knowledge is fine to a certain degree, but letting that character believe they have nothing more to learn and hence are not willing to actively hear another person's point of view is not. Thus, such actions indicate the person is on a mission to preserve their carnal identity in place of true understanding. Being right for that person at that point is what matters most, rather than being correct. I have met people in my walk of life who became self-righteous. They believe they represent the epitome of correctness. Some of them are charismatic personalities who even go as far as having followers who help validate their singular ideology even further. As I said before, we all form individual or collective rights due to having our very own family values, ideologies, cultures, etc. This does not in any way, shape, or form reduce the path someone else treads, because the destination is one and the same, even if we are taking different routes. Blind adherence to these charismatic leaders can be ultimately destructive. There's a great video from Indian motivational speaker Gwar Gopal Das in which he talks of giving up our ego and even being apologetic at times when we feel we are right, in order to achieve a greater good. He specifically touched on his guilt of losing his father before he could apologize for his past transgressions. He had contemplated the apology for more than half a decade. Those years of procrastination could have been avoided had the ego allowed him to do so. The irony of this narrative is the fact that it was his very own ego that ended up causing him the greatest amount of regret and pain. When he realized and accepted this, he thus begun to conquer his ego, which shows us that he is on the path towards the journey in. Acceptance is the beginning. Acceptance is vital, because what I have come to realize over time is that those who preach the most, practice what they are preaching the least. They are often surrounded by people who stoke their egos relentlessly, to the point where they start believing it's okay to be that way. Meet Mr. Rigid. Such is true of a colleague of mine. He tends to preach to everyone at work. He thinks he represents the beacon of truth and that everyone should use him as a benchmark standard. On several occasions, I have walked in on him in the tea room where he would spend his lunch break reading from a religious scripture. At the time I would enter, he would stop reading and start preaching to me what he believed the scripture to say. I noticed over the years that I worked with him that his opinions became stronger. I had to take a step back and contemplate this change, whether it was positive or negative. He built a stronger personality over the years, which was a good thing because it says to the world that you believe in and stand for something. The problem was not the strength of character, but the rigidity of this singular belief. Having contemplated this further, I decided to have a conversation with my co-worker, who I'll refer to only as Mr. Rigid, in the tea room at lunch. I wanted to get him to share his ideas, but to do so, I needed him to be in his element, and for that, I needed to access his ego by playing the part of an individual seeking his advice. I knew he would be honored to preach to me, and preaching to me would make him feel like he was doing God's work and gaining brownie points. I asked him to share parts of the scripture with me. Again, the irony was he would read a verse to me in English, which I clearly understood, but then he would stop and also explain to me what he in his opinion believed that verse to mean, unlike a thorough exegetical analysis. What became very clear to me was that if I questioned his interpretation of certain verses, he would become irate. Nevertheless, I stayed calm, as my objective was not to hurt his feelings, but rather try to understand the root of this change that took place in him. I cautiously probed further whilst informing him why I begged to differ and asked whether it was okay to have a difference of opinion. He went on to explain that questioning his version of interpretation too much would border on being classified as almost devilish. As I did not personally hail from the same religion, I decided to ask another friend of mine who was of the same faith as Mr. Rigid. This confused me even further because he agreed with my liberal stance and explained that there were different branches of the same faith, much like a tree which has one root but many branches. You cannot say that one branch is better than the others. I started to feel like many people go through a set journey within their faith. 1. Individuals have a weak understanding of their faith. Meaning at some point they come to the realization that they follow a religion and identify with it. Yet, they may have difficulties with the religion and so ask questions on topics they are unsure of, in order to understand and keep their faith intact. 2. Some start the journey of seeking true knowledge. This can be done through any number of methods, for example, seeking out conversations with religious leaders in their community or beyond, reading books, watching videos, listening to podcasts, reading their holy book, in order to establish a viewpoint, seeking to gain further spiritual connection through prayer, meditation, etc. 3. Gaining more information strengthens both their understanding and the way they interpret their faith, and likewise they start forming strong opinions. Hopefully, these opinions are based on their own understanding of what they see and read and experience, but obviously, the history of organized religion tells us that is anything but the case in many instances. Regardless of whether the individual is able to build their own knowledge of their religion or if they are subscribing to someone else's information, regardless, they will begin to build their opinions and seek to make them a more intrinsic part of their lives. 4. Some will internalize the knowledge and become expansive. It allows one to love, care, and accept diversity. Others fall prey to a fossilized, rigid, singular ideology which allows no room for movement. 5. At that point, two reactions prevail. those who think they are the beacon of truth from the opinion they form and don't understand that others may not have read the same information as them. Hence they believe they may have a duty of care to inform them. The second reaction is that if they have not been born into the same culture, family values, schooling, and social surroundings, they might form a varied opinion of what is being read, which is also enriching. The latter reaction is one of openness, whereby a person realizes there are an infinite number of ways in which people may interpret their truth, and therefore the subjective understanding, or as subjective as one could arrive to, could come from open dialogue. So which way is better? I believe religions were formed to make people better. They were supposed to make man imbibe the values of goodness such as honesty, patience, kindness, compassion, empathy, loving thy neighbor, forgiveness. But in many cases, that is not what happened. People turned the religious teachings into an ideal, and then a mandate that was so rigid that there was no room for anyone else's opinions to be appreciated or respected. It really makes me wonder how someone can get all dressed up and go to their house of worship with not even an iota of mercy for other people just because they have varied beliefs. It begs me to ask whether they go to satisfy their own ego, to achieve credibility, or to truly serve and submit to the God they have chosen to have faith in. Understanding how someone goes about their faith is a lot like seeing what kind of hygiene they have. If a person keeps their house tidy all the time, not just when company is coming over, it means that they value being clean and neat. If someone is a true believer, they are not motivated by fear or because they long for a reward, but rather because they believe in their actions from a place of selfless love. Be like melting snow, wash yourself of yourself. Rumi. If religion was created to make people better, why do so few people act better because of it? Why is it that many people who don't believe in a particular holy scripture, but do believe in humanity, imbibe the prior mentioned values relatively more than those that do at times? Please do not look at me for the answer, I am in search myself, but I am asking you all to also take a moment to think about this for yourself. Chapter 7, Collecting Evidence. In order to answer these burning questions, I decided to carry out a small qualitative research study using an interpretive philosophical approach, using observations to arrive at some conclusive understanding. I decided to use this research method and philosophy as I thought to myself, can anything be purely objective? Even if for a minute we assume through organic development there is such a thing as objective truth, there are still lots of holes in the nature of it. The concept of etymology, which looks at how the meanings of words or what we understand those words to mean, has changed over time. How then can we be so sure of an objective truth? All we can be sure of is our understanding of what we perceive to be the truth. This is fairly common among a group of people, but cannot carry more weight than someone else's understanding of truth. Religion came about to bring about peace and make humans a better species. Simple, right? Everything else might be debatable and contextualized in whichever way people see fit, in order to keep their bubble intact, but this one truth is unequivocally unwavering, as far as I am concerned. Therefore, I decided to study the action, behaviour of people of different faiths. I started by observing the actions of people of faith and assessing how closely I believe them to exude those attributes mentioned earlier, i.e. kindness, compassion, empathy, sympathy, etc. My burning question became, can you be religious 1 minute and then not religious the next? Religion takes you on a journey and should help one embody those attributes, therefore how can one be anything other than what they should be if they are traveling down the path to true faithfulness? Truly, it is utter hypocrisy and unjust for me to show to represent one faith so strongly, but yet not exude the characteristics that the faith advocates. It's been more than a decade since I undertook this journey. The chance to start this journey of discovery happened when a friend, who was teaching me the fine art of playing acoustic guitar, invited me to his church to hear him play in a worship service. It was an impressive evening of music, and after the service, I was introduced to one of the lead church workers. I thought this was the perfect opportunity to start my research, as he offered me to eat with the entire congregation, as was their tradition after services. The man explained the Christian theology to me, including their belief that Jesus Christ died on the cross and in doing so sacrificed himself for the sins of his believers. I asked if that meant that no matter how badly someone behaves, their sins are forgiven. His answer essentially pointed to this notion being affirmative, although he said it depends on how much faith one has in Jesus, which alluded to the fact that if you were in true faith with Jesus, then you would essentially not carry out those actions in the first place. I thought this was an interesting take, but then any person from any faith who had full faith would refrain from acting contrary to what their scriptures say, should they not? I decided to carry on visiting every week for the Sunday service for a few months. I learned that Christianity had more than a few major branches. I already knew about Protestantism and Catholicism, and now learned about Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, Evangelical, Anglican, Mormons, and more. I realized over the following Sundays that although the service was an absolute joy by nature, people seemed to want an open discussion by expressing how wrong they felt opposing ideologies are, to the point that they could almost be considered lost in the way to the truth of their view. Of course, that is a flaw of any of the branches of many religions, as I came to learn throughout my study. They were consistent in that Jesus is God and that the Bible is the Book of God. Otherwise, they varied on matters such as the role of the Pope, on the existence of saints, on the need for cathedrals, on how much music to play in a service, and so on. What surprised me from my experience was how much people of faith focused on differences rather than appreciating and respecting diversity. Let me be clear, this is not just a phenomenon based around only Christianity, rather all other religions I happened to experience fell prey to this. I remember the narrative of how Jesus was persecuted, what his reaction was, and how, out of love, compassion, and empathy, he brought people of faith to unite, not part. Time was spent praising, rather than trying to prove oneself right. My thoughts for all religious sects are, think, you trying to praise God or validate your own ego? This experimental journey did not end there. I have a Shia Muslim friend who had asked me to accompany him to his mosque many times. It was the month of Muharram, the first month of the year according to the Islamic faith. My friend fasted during the month and went to the mosque often to take part in the rites and rituals where the imams hold speeches in remembrance of their beloved and revered holy saints who were persecuted. They commemorate this sad occasion with great mourning. I was honored that he invited me. Furthermore, I was pleased as we made it in time for the sermon, therefore allowing me to indulge and learn about their way of expressing themselves through the Quranic scripture. Although distinct in its own way, this sect was still nonetheless an Abrahamic faith which believes in the one God. I came to realize that there was great similarity between Catholics and Shia Muslims, whereby Shia Muslims follow the teachings of Hazrat Ali and the Catholics that of their Pope, both earthbound leaders said to be the closest of anyone in their connection to the higher power. I knew the Sunni Muslim community's thoughts varied in that they held sacred, such as the Quran and prophethood, and did not place as much emphasis on sainthood or a figurehead to translate the Quran for them. This resonated with a similar theology to that of the Protestants. I decided at this point to explore a non-Abrahamic faith to see how it may differ, and chose the Hindu temple I used to always pass on my way to work in London. Near the front door, I was met by a curious security guard. He stared at me and said, "Jai Shri Krishna." I decided to respond and say the same back. He immediately smiled at me and said, "Free parking for people doing darshan." I knew in its literal Hindi sense the word darshan meant to pay homage, respect, but to whom exactly I was still to find out. Just as I got close to the doors of the temple, I met other people who were also visiting. There was a man dressed in colorful robes sitting at what seemed like an inquiry table. I stopped and decided to share with him the fact that I was a seeker, an explorer, and was visiting. The man welcomed me and asked what I wanted to know. I didn't quite know where to start, but thought to ask the most obvious: what are these sculptures and what do they represent? He explained to me that Hinduism was less a religion and more a philosophy. He went on to explain each sculpture that appeared in the temple and who or what it represented within the Hindu scriptures. One which resonated with me the most was one named Krishna. The sculpture was grandiose and was set on a battlefield. The man explained that Krishna was a demigod. I questioned what he was doing on a battlefield, to which the man replied, "Karma, a Sanskrit word meaning action, not just on the battlefield, but action of any kind." He went on to explain that in Hinduism, God himself came down in the form of man to fulfill his duties. He then continued to explain the importance of righteous action and the fact that man only had two choices: to carry out actions, or to be inactive. I questioned that by asking if one were to carry out those actions, what rewards would one obtain? Heavenly gardens, lush waterfalls, a palace to live in. He explained the core reason that the Lord had to descend was to teach man that his duties on earth should be selflessly motivated. I asked, if man does not gain something in return, then why would he carry out any actions whatsoever? He explained that such ideas of retribution are a human tendency and that the notion of action versus reward is one we should battle against while working towards selfless action. Righteous action in itself is man's duty, not the expectation of a return of being dutiful, because that is not in our hands, so to speak. I think he could tell I had another 50 questions lined up to ask him, but before he could, he said, "You have asked many questions, I too have a question if you would care to answer." He asked me what my understanding of the concept of love was, and told me to be careful in my answer and consider who is loving and who is being loved. Feeling a little put on the spot, I blurted out, "Love is when someone makes you feel special, cares for you, and makes one's heart flutter and melt when being around them." He took in my words and responded, "See, it is all about the way the person makes you feel. What about the way you make that person feel because you too love them? Or is your love limited and conditional, only dependent on whether the person opposite you makes you feel that way?" I was feeling confused, and then got a little annoyed when he followed up by telling me, "You don't really love unconditionally, but rather you love the way you are being loved, therefore it is conditional." Is truly selfless love possible outside of a parent and child relationship? Even that relationship is not often pure, as many parents think of their children as an investment that they are waiting for a return from when they are all grown up. Children come to earth with their own game plans and choices. We should not interfere with that divine plan. On the way home, I gave more thought to my interchange with the man at the Hindu temple. I realized that it was not a flaw of the scriptures, but a flaw of man that convoluted the scriptures to fit our own narratives. It makes you wonder what the disconnect is between the teaching and the actual actions on earth. It makes me ponder the election process for the appointed leaders of any religion at this stage in history. Are they getting nominated and receiving votes because of their political agendas or their place in different factions of their religious organization? Or are they being chosen based on how much they embody their religion's version of a supreme being? As I went through my notes of the three experiences, I began to notice the similarities far more than the differences. All three faiths are fascinating in their rituals, steadfast in their traditions, but there appears to be something lost in translation in each of them. They all have religious texts that very clearly state the word of God and what his requirements are to his followers in order to not only please him, but also gain access to eternal salvation. Yet, there is a clear disconnect between the word of God and what is being practiced by his followers. Where is the fault line? Why is it so pervasive? Again, I believe it comes back to our carnal self and our fear. We fear what we are tasked to do by our faith, but even the word of God is not enough to curtail us from the bad habits we've formed over the years, such as letting the beliefs of others become more important to us. It is a conscious practice that we have to work on repeatedly in order for it to become our routine, and for most of us, it simply is not convenient or rewarding enough to try. Thus we are caught in the cycle of seeking self-gratification, while our souls hunger and suffer for the true power within, the power that lets us do what is best for everyone. Chapter 8, Proof of our common purpose. The subject of beliefs continues to fascinate me. In particular, where they came from, how they were formed, our natural tendencies and reactions, and the current disconnect between what is taught via religion and what our reality actually looks like and what things we hold as the most valuable. What is the solution to break this current cycle and push us away from our individual fascination and towards the life choices that highlight the collective and the selfless? In my experience, solutions have never been achieved by focusing on problems, nor have solutions been found by playing the blame game. If anything, greatness has always been achieved when humans unify and come together. As intelligent beings, we should be at a point where, much like in a marriage, we are able to agree to disagree. We should be able to talk through our ideas and appreciate one another's points of view without dismissing them in order to validate our own. In recent years, I have seen a grave rise in disagreements on the most minute of things, particularly regarding religion and land. This last chapter is focused largely on verses from a few different religions, ones that I have been fortunate enough to have some insight into, although I am no expert by any means. My goal here is to showcase just how similar one faith is to another, by focusing on verses from their sacred texts. I am sure all the other religions preach something similar, i.e. being kind, compassionate, selfless, generous, and empathetic, but I chose these religions purely because I experienced them organically in my life as a lived experience, either because I have friends who subscribe to that religion or I happen to cross paths with them. This book is not meant to validate or discredit anyone's views or interpretation of any verses, but to focus on their similarities in an attempt to unite people. The worst thing we do as humans is use verses from our holy scriptures to justify and validate our carnal tendencies. The important thing is to resist this tendency and try to change our behaviour incrementally. There have been many times I have tried to make my wife carry out household chores that I don't want to and justify it as an order from God, threatening her with the concept of hell if she disobeyed. Many times she had a very legitimate reason for not doing so, such as being tired from caring for the children or my extended family, or when her migraine headaches flared up. Are these not good reasons? Could I not think of a better solution in these circumstances? Was religion not brought about in order to spark unconditional kindness in our fellow humans? To treat each other with care, compassion, love, and unity? Instead, we use it to justify our points of view and fulfill our carnal desires. The Quran mentions that Allah provides for tribes and nations, therefore validating His choice to create and for us to appreciate diversity. One simple example I heard in front of me, again not to credit or discredit other scriptures. O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you peoples and tribes that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you. Indeed, Allah is knowing and acquainted. 49:13. If for a moment we look at a few different scriptures and look at the concept of peace, each one proclaims peace in its own beautiful way. 1. Quran, Islam, and the servants of the Most Merciful are those who walk upon the earth easily, and when the ignorant address them harshly, they say words of peace. O Quran, Surah Al-Furqan, 25:63. 2. Bhagavad Gita, Hinduism, the yogi is greater than the ascetic, greater than the empiricist, and greater than the fruitive worker. Therefore, O Arjuna, in all circumstances, be a yogi. O Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 6, Verse 46. 3. Bible, Christianity, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. O Matthew 5 verse 9, New Testament. 4. Torah, Judaism, seek peace and pursue it. O Psalms 34 verse 14, Old Testament. 5. From the Guru Granth Sahib, Sikhism. O peace and happiness will only come when you walk in the path of the Lord. Humans are quick to focus on killing others in the name of religion, or rather our take on religion, but look at how important the preservation of life of others is, so much so that if one kills another then it is as if they have killed mankind. From the Quran, Islam. 1. And do not kill the soul which Allah has forbidden, except by right. O Quran, Surah Al-Isra, 1733. 2. And do not take life, which Allah has made sacred, except in the course of justice. O Quran, Surah Al-An'am, 6:151. 3. Whoever kills a soul unless for a soul or for corruption, done, in the land it is as if he had slain mankind entirely. O Quran, Surah Al-Ma'idah, 5:32. From the Bible, Christianity. 1. You shall not murder. O Exodus 20 verse 13, Old Testament. 2. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment, whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. O Matthew 5 verse 22, New Testament. 3. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. O Romans 12 verse 19, New Testament. From the Torah, Judaism. 1. You shall not murder. O Exodus 20 verse 13. 2. You shall not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. O Leviticus 19 verse 16. 3. Whoever shed the blood of a man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. O Genesis 9 verse 6. From the Bhagavad Gita, Hinduism. 1. A person can rise through the efforts of his own mind. If he has a pure mind, joy follows him as his own shadow. O Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, verse 5. 2. The soul is neither born, and nor does it die. O Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 20. 3. Weapons do not cut it, fire does not burn it, water does not wet it, and wind does not wither it. O Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 23. From the Guru Granth Sahib. 1. Do not harbor any bad intentions or hatred towards anyone, this is the teaching of the Guru. O Guru Granth Sahib, page 101. 2. To break the bonds of evil in the heart and to shun vice is to live according to God's will. O Guru Granth Sahib, page 951. 3. Renounce violence and cruelty, and harm no one. This is the way of the true Guru. O Guru Granth Sahib, page 354. Let us now explore the concept of forgiveness. 1. Quran, Islam, and let them pardon and overlook. Would you not like that Allah should forgive you? And Allah is forgiving and merciful. O Quran, Surah Al-Nur, 2400 hours 22. 2. Bhagavad Gita, Hinduism, the divine qualities lead to liberation, while the demoniac qualities are the cause for bondage. Do not worry, O son of Pandu, for you were born with divine qualities. O chapter 16, verse 3. 3. Bible, Christianity, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. O Ephesians 4 verse 32. 4. Torah, Judaism, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion and sin. O Exodus 34 verses 6-7. 5. Guru Granth Sahib, Sikhism, let no one even think of doing evil to him. Let him rather think of his own past misdeeds. O and 843. Each of these verses emphasizes the importance of forgiveness and compassion in their respective religions, encouraging followers to forgive others as they seek forgiveness for themselves or as an expression of divine attributes. If we look at conflict in each narrative, many times we dismiss such in pursuit of our own egotistic goal or a means to validate our own subjective viewpoint. Each verse has a precondition and expresses the importance for peace over war. Within the verse, the fact always exists that we should not strive for war as a means to an end, but instead strive for peace and only pursue war when there is absolutely no alternative remaining. Only then is war really permitted. Examine these passages carefully and in context. 1. Quran, Islam, fight in the way of Allah those who fight you but do not transgress. Indeed, Allah does not transgress. Indeed, Allah does not like transgressors. And kill them wherever you overtake them and expel them from wherever they have expelled you, and fitna, oppression, is worse than killing. But do not fight them at al-Masjid al-Haram unless they fight you there. But if they fight you then kill them. Such is the recompense of disbelievers. And if they cease, then indeed, Allah is forgiving and merciful. Fight them until there is no more fitna and until worship is acknowledged to be for Allah. But if they cease, then there is to be no aggression except against your oppressors. O Surah Al-Baqarah, 2:190-193. 2. Bhagavad Gita, Hinduism, considering your Dharma, you should not waver. For a warrior, there is nothing more honorable than a war against evil. O Chapter 2, verse 31. 3. Guru Granth Sahib, Sikhism, when all other means have failed, it is righteous to take up the sword. O Ang 1099, line 9. It is important to note that these verses are often misinterpreted and understood within the broader context of the respective religious teachings and are subject to diverse interpretations by scholars and practitioners. The understanding of when and how to apply these teachings in contemporary contexts can vary amongst individuals and communities within these faiths. It is therefore imperative not to miscontextualize the scripts as a means to validate our own subjective opinions, but rather to understand the script within the broader context and understand the broader teaching underlying the Word of God. The importance of deeper thinking and use of intellect has been wonderfully expressed in this excerpt I have used by Reza Shah Kazemi. 2011. The Quran describes itself in one of its verses as clarification of everything, Tibyanin li kulli shay, 16 hours 89 minutes. This implies that the scope of the guidance found in the Quran cannot be restricted to any time and place. It must contain, not a blueprint for each and every situation that might arise in any time or place, but a set of guiding principles which are universally valid and can thus be appropriately applied in any time or place. The universal significance of the Quran therefore strictly implies its contemporary relevance, and this relevance can be brought to light only by a creative interpretative engagement with the relevant text. Rather than uncritically regurgitating the literal meaning of the verses, and imagining that they can in and of themselves provide clarification of everything. Muslims are called upon to ponder thoughtfully the principles embodied in the verses and to use their intelligence to arrive at conclusions, moral, intellectual and spiritual, to the complex issues generated by ever-changing conditions. In other words, taqlid, or simple imitation, is to give way to tahqiq, personal verification, in relation to the meaning of the Quran, cannot dispense with established traditional principles of commentary, needless to say. But neither can the quest for personal meaning be satisfied by merely studying the interpretations of one's predecessors, however compelling they may be. Muslims, of all major schools of thought, are encouraged to engage with the Quranic revelations creatively, intelligently and sensitively. Quranic prayer will then be accompanied and deepened by both rational comprehension and intuitive understanding. This all-embracing intellectual engagement enhances receptivity of the sacramental presence of the revealed word, kalam, and thus to the theurgic power granted by the speaker, al-mutakallim, of that word. Spiritual question. Reza Shah Kazemi, 2011. There is no benefit in recitation without contemplation. There is no benefit in worship without comprehension. Hazrat Ali. How wonderful is the above excerpt and quotation, but again only for those who may have arrived at an objective understanding. The journey in, I hope, has been a valuable guide to take you there, starting with understanding and realizing your own fears and then looking at ways in which you may be able to take control of them. It starts with deconstructing the egotistic narrative, realizing and accepting the fact that truths are mostly subjective, or at least based on some collective norms. Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. Confucius. Conclusion. The ability to put aside the carnal and move to a position of living for others and for the community of all men is not an overnight transformation. It is a journey through yourself, your entire belief system, and how you view yourself in the company of others. You will struggle in this endeavor. You will encounter opposition. You may think it easier just to go with the flow than challenge your own belief systems and those around you. That's true, it is easier, but it is the equivalent of the ostrich that hides its head in the ground rather than facing impending danger. It is not worthy of the gift that has been given to you by God, the gift of life. Diversity is strength. God mentions it in many places. He has made us tribes as nations so that we may live in tranquility with others. We must learn to not just tolerate but accept and love one another as kith and kin. Having someone accept your narrative with their heart always starts with understanding, love, care, and compassion. Just think back to any elected official you've ever voted for. Has any one of them been able to win people's votes without first winning their hearts with acts of kindness, care, compassion, and empathy? I earnestly encourage you to think for yourself and form your own opinion. Don't just accept the beliefs of others. What you think about constantly becomes what you talk about constantly, and what you talk about constantly becomes your actions. Therefore, be mindful from the very start and be careful with what you feed your mind with. We can't always choose our thoughts, but we can surely control them over time with consistent training. This is a process, a marathon, not a sprint. I think that's one of the reasons so many people fail to make and keep the commitment to this sort of living. They want a solution that takes 30 minutes or then a gigasecond. I invite you to do your own research, compare it with what you have learnt in the pages of this book, talk to the people around you, explore their actions and their beliefs, and most importantly reach your own conclusion. Actions speak louder than words. This is the roadmap to your own journey in the most important parts of your own mind, your soul, and your own purpose on earth. Due to our carnal nature, i.e. the physical always strives to search outwardly, constantly searching for something tangible, i.e. something that it can touch, feel, or see. Have you ever thought to yourself, you might have come across many people who have reached the pinnacle of material success, but how many of those have gone on to become consumed in some kind of addiction or even killed themselves? Have you given thought to why? Don't look at me for answers. This book is not one of solutions, but rather one which strives for you to take your own journey in and search for your own answers. I might have a subjective opinion, but my opinion is just as valid as yours, as it is your own journey in. I encourage you to just give it some thought. Even the notion of saints, priests, peers, etc., may well be valid, as they may all have achieved great levels of self-realization. But there is absolutely nothing better than to realize your own truth by delving into your own journey in. Intuition is your soul whispering the truth to your heart. The reason you have a hard time trusting your intuition is because you are still convinced that some outside authority still knows better than you. Let me remind you today that your intuition is a gift. When you disregard this inner voice, you are dismissing the wealth of knowledge that is stored within you. Anon. Let your journey begin.